Welcome to the Truth Driven Ministries Podcast, where we talk about things like growth mindsets, healing, communication, identity, mission, and purpose. Are you feeling stuck? Don't worry. We'll be discussing practical ways to break through and level up your life. Let's get started. Welcome. Today we are here, and don't scroll past this video because you're going to want to watch today, especially if you're single. But even if you're not single, we have something for you marrieds and committed people out there. Today we are talking about, are you relationship ready? And we've got 10 questions that we're going to discuss to help you decide whether you are or not relationship ready. So let's dive into this.
Yes.
Well, actually, let's talk about our weekend this weekend, what did we do? We had a workshop.
We had an amazing workshop this weekend.
We did.
Yes.
Becoming a relationship beast.
Yep. Lots of great information. I think a lot of people really took a lot away from what we talked about yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think it really sparked a lot in them to be like, wow, I didn't realize all of that about relationships and what it all requires.
Yeah. And we during the workshop, we talked about all kinds of relationships. Because we have a relationship with everything. We talked about how we have a relationship with money. We have a relationship with food. We have a relationship with our friends. We have romantic relationships. There are so many different ones.
Yeah.
But today, we're talking to you singles.
Yay.
But also, like I said, for you marrieds and you committed people, I really want you to think about, okay, am I taking my relationship for granted? When you're single, you got to work for it.
That's true.
Sometimes when we get into relationships, we start taking people for granted. And even if we're married or if we're committed, so this is kind of just like a vibe check, like, hey, how are you doing? Are you still plugged in? Are you still connected in your relationships? Because these are important things, I think, to think about. These 10 questions are in no way exhaustive. Like these are all the questions that you have to ask, but it gets a good conversation going.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, honestly, people aren't ready for relationships. Why do relationships fail? Because we're not ready for relationships. And if we're not ready for a relationship and we understand what we need to do to get prepared for it, then we can go in and we can have those beast mode, awesome relationships.
Yeah.
So, we ready to discuss the 10 questions?
I'm very ready. I am excited. I'm excited to hear this today because I'm like, man, I feel like I'm going to learn a lot. I'm single.
Yes.
So I'm excited to talk about what makes you relationship ready. Are you relationship ready? What are some things you need to ask yourself?
Yes.
I'm super pumped.
Well, I'm excited that you're pumped. And just to put a little advertising out there for you. Christina, she is single. And I can verify and vouch for her that she is relationship ready.
Yes.
So, but let's see.
Okay.
For everybody
Let's find
else,
out.
let's open up this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Number one question that I want to talk about. What is your motivation for being in a relationship? There's many different reasons to be in a relationship, and there are many reasons not to be in a relationship. If you ask yourself, okay, what my motivation is, and really what we're talking about here is we're talking about a lot of like, what do you want out of that relationship? Do you want somebody to complete you? You want somebody to take care of you? You want to quit being lonely? And not reasons to be in a relationship because they're not sustainable. If you go into a relationship with those motivations, you're setting yourself up to be rejected.
Yeah.
You're setting yourself up to self-sabotage. You're setting yourself up already to fail in those relationships. What are some of the things, the motivations that you've seen people be in relationships and they just don't pan out?
If you're looking for someone who is who you want them to be instead of who they are.
That's a good one.
If you're looking for someone to fulfill something in your life that you feel is lacking, that is something you could fulfill yourself.
It's usually going to go south.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I see people, they want to fulfill like their loneliness, or they want to fulfill an idea that they have of what a relationship is instead of what an actual relationship is.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out when you do that because you don't get what you are looking for it to be, because you're impression of a relationship is not realistic.
And really, truly, if there's any shallow, what I would describe as a shallow reason that motivates you for that relationship, it's just not going to pan out, because the things that you truly have to sustain a healthy, life-giving relationship, they're just you have to have deep roots for those kinds of things. So your motivation going into it's very important. A lot of people could make a case for, I'm just trying to have fun, I'm just trying to do that. But I'm sorry, if you're dating in the Christian world, you're dating for a purpose.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people say, I just want to have fun, I just want to do that. Then don't date, have a friend.
Absolutely.
Because you have to decide what you want. And if you're just playing around, that leads us into question number 2. I won't get ahead. I will try not to get ahead of myself. But actually, before I even get to that question, I want to answer, what is good motivation for a relationship? We talked about some of the things that won't work. But I would say a lot of us get to the point where we just want to share our life with somebody. We want a life partner. I want somebody to invest in. I want somebody to invest in me. I want somebody to have similar goals and values, and just depending upon what season you are in your life, you can already have kids, you can not have kids, you can have empty nest. Whatever season you are in, you still have that drive to have that partner and to create a life with. And those are excellent reasons to get into a relationship, because if you have that drive to have a partnership, you're already halfway there in your thinking and your mindset that, hey, this is going to be work, not horrible work, fun work, but this is going to be work, and I'm going to have to compromise. I'm going to have to give of myself. I'm going to have to create something that's not just about me, but that is about a couple.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize when they go into it. There's a great example, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, that I've heard before. But if you are going to China to be a missionary, and you go to the airport and you're like, well, I'll just go anywhere, and someone goes with you, you're going to wake up in 2 years and be like, I never was called to be a missionary in China, but this person was, and I went with them.
Yeah.
Like, you have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what you're going into the relationship for.
Because if you don't, you will end up following somebody else into their dream.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said I'm probably going to butcher this example, but
No,
it really was eye-opening, because you can't look for them to create your life. You have to have your own goals,
where you're going.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. So question 1, again, is what is your motivation for being in a relationship? And truly just dive into that. And that can change over the course of time, and that's fine. But if it's for a reason that is shallow, I hate to call it that, but if I just don't want to be alone, then do some deep diving into your wounds, into your hurts, and enjoy being with yourself. Because then when you enjoy being with yourself, you're going to enjoy being with everybody else. Things like that aren't reasons to get into a relationship, and they don't fix those type of things. If I'm bored, if I'm lonely, if I just have an idea of what marriage is, and I enter into a relationship, and it's based off of an image that I have instead of being specific to that person, it's going to be hard for that relationship to really take root. So that leads me to question 2. What is the end goal? You have to really decide what your end goal is for a relationship, because what we see a lot of times is people will get involved in relationships and they just kind of wander and meander in a relationship. What are we doing? A lot of people date for marriage. And if you're dating and you're headed towards a committed long-term relationship, anytime that person gets out of the running, you stop dating.
Yep.
But people won't do that a lot of the times.
Right.
People will just say, well, I don't want to break up. I don't have anybody better. I'm just going to date this person until somebody better comes along. And who wants to be dated if somebody's thinking about them that way. I think truly the way that you can be most respectful is in the beginning of the relationship to ask yourself, what are your goals? If somebody just wants a summer fling, then fine, find somebody else that wants a summer fling. But if two people's goals are, hey, I'm dating for marriage, I'm dating for a long-term committed serious relationship, I want. So we just had a little power outage, so you might see a little blip in our recording. But we were live, but we are no longer live, but we are still recording so that we can go ahead and post this video later.
Yeah.
We were talking about what is your end goal in your relationships. With your end goal, why are you in a relationship? What are you doing? Why are you in it? We talked about as Christians, a lot of times what our end goal is we date for marriage.
Yes.
You can want to have fun, then date somebody that wants to have fun. But at the same time, if you are dating with the purpose of, and the end game is a long-term commitment, you don't want to play around. And as soon as you find something that eliminates that person, it doesn't have to be negative on them. Everybody has their preferences. Just because somebody is eliminated from you doesn't say anything about them, but you're looking for certain characteristics. And as soon as you're like, okay, I wouldn't progress, I wouldn't marry this person, then we need to quit dating. But people don't do that. What do?
Well, they use what's the word? We've talked about it before. Even when you were talking about just dating around,
Mhm.
if you say, I want to be married, I want marriage, but
Mhm.
in the meantime, while I wait, I'm just going to date around, even if the person or the
Mhm.
people you're dating
I'm
isn't
just going to
serious.
wait for my person to come.
Mm-hmm.
No, because what happens is feelings get involved. And I
Yes.
call it snacking.
Yes, that's the word. I was trying to think of the word that you've used before to talk about that.
If you want to be hungry for marriage, if you want to be hungry for a relationship, let yourself be hungry for it,
Mm-hmm.
because it creates a different mindset. But if you're snacking, if you're like, well, I'll go out with this person, I'll go with this person, and it just takes the edge off of wanting to be in a relationship, or takes the edge off of the pain of not being in a relationship, you're not going to really be looking as you should be looking. And you're not going to be hungry for that relationship because you've just been snacking.
Right.
So you really sabotage yourself. When you begin, again, number 2 is to think about what your goal is, your end goal for being in a relationship. Be very, very, very clear about that, because I know a lot of people don't like to quit dating because it feels hurtful.
Mhm.
Dating for a lot of people fills up time,
Yes.
and that's not a reason to date.
No,
So,
just to be busy.
no, it's
Yeah.
not. And you will get emotionally attached to that person, and it will make it harder to end that relationship.
Absolutely.
So, number 3 question we want to open up and think about a conversation about is, what do you bring to the table? A lot of times when people are dating, it cracks me up. It's like this Christmas wish list. Not putting anybody down, but my gosh,
It's true.
like Jesus couldn't make that list.
Right.
And so I like to tell people, what are you bringing to the table? And this is the same for committed people and for the marrieds out there also. What are you bringing to the table in your relationships? Because if you're focused on that, then you're really focused on moving forward and growing and showing up and staying connected. Your mindset's just different than just sitting back and saying, well, this person needs to be this and this person needs to be that. And I tell you, I have seen wish lists that do not match that person.
No. And don't include character. They'll
Woo.
include so many things that they value and they say are so important, but
Mhm.
it doesn't speak anything to a person's character
No.
and
But
who they're
so
looking for.
on what are you bringing to the table?
Right.
You need to bring character
Yes.
to the table, because if you don't bring character to the table, it don't matter about your wish list.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's just crazy how we get to the point where we are so focused on what we want, because that's kind of, and we're going to see, it doesn't work for a relationship. A relationship has to be giving. A relationship has to be a partnership. And honestly, if we're looking at what we bring to the table, I think sometimes we realize maybe we're not ready for a relationship because there's some areas where, wow, you know what? We always say if you want an upgrade, be an upgrade.
Yes. I love
So
that.
if you are looking and you're like, you know what? I really don't like myself in this area. And it's not about you as a person. God sets your identity. But if you're like, you know what, I could grow up a little bit in this area, do yourself a favor, do your future mate a favor, and really dive into what are you bringing to the table. And if you're looking for somebody that's a reflection of what you're bringing to the table, you're more likely to get it if you're actually bringing that to the table.
Yes.
You can't say, I want somebody that's faithful and bring unfaithfulness to the table. You can't say, I want somebody to be honest and not bring honesty to the table. You really have to think about, okay, what am I bringing? What am I offering? If I were a commercial about myself, what kind of products would I be, and how would it look? How would it sound? And I don't mean on a surface level. I truly mean, like, okay, what makes getting into a relationship with you what is it going to add to somebody else's life?
Yeah.
You're wanting somebody to add to your life, but if you're being a drain or a pull, that's not going to work really well.
No. I remember when I was learning about this, probably when I first started working with you, and I remember thinking, I really want somebody that has a debt-free mindset, but I was not debt-free, and I did not have a debt-free mindset because I had debt.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, if I want to meet somebody who says, I really care about, the kind of debt that I carry, or how I manage it, or what I have or not having any, then I have to live that way first.
Yes, because it has to be important to you. I can't just have this wish list, like, kind of we talked about, even like with debt free, or even just with honesty.
Right.
I can't say I'm only going to go out with people who are honest and then don't have that attribute myself.
Right.
Like, these characteristics have to be independently important to me, and they have to be shown in my life.
I have to live them.
Yes. If you are going to be debt free, if you are wanting somebody that's debt free, and then they start talking and you're like, oh, I want somebody that's debt free. And they're like, oh, I just love that I love being debt free. I'm glad you are too. And you're like, well, I'm not really debt free, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah. That happens all the time.
They're like, see ya.
Yeah.
Because you can't make something important to somebody, it has to already be important. So whatever's important to you, bring that to the table. Very, very, very important. Number 4, we talked a little bit about this last night. Number 4, what are your red flags? I think we're so used to looking at other people's red flags, but I want to know my red flags, for one, because those are the things that I need to work on.
Yes.
And we were talking all about red flags. What were some of the red flags that came up last night?
Oh,
it was
they were
really
so
interesting.
good.
It was so
I'm
good.
trying to remember
A red flag does not have to be like, okay, nobody can have a relationship. Few red flags are what I would call deal breakers, but you want to know what your red flags are.
I'm trying to remember.
We talked about, for somebody, some people are too nice.
Yes, that was a good one.
How is that a deal breaker?
Right.
I'm sorry. How is that a red flag? It's a red flag because typically if you're too nice, you can't say no.
Right.
And if they can't say no to you, they can't say no to other people either. So if I can't say no to myself, I can't say no to other people, then that brings a lot of baggage into the relationship.
Yes. If someone's highly critical, highly judgmental, that's a red flag. It's something you would want to work on. So if you find yourself being that way, I think that was one thing somebody mentioned. If you find yourself with that, that's a red flag.
And we talked last night specifically also about sometimes people are outwardly critical.
Yes.
And then sometimes people are, if we could read their thought bubbles, critical.
Yeah.
But it's still the same thing, whether you're saying it or you're not, you're conveying that energy of, I'm judging you.
Yeah.
And
I love that we talked about our red flags.
Yes.
It was really eye-opening.
It was fun to talk about all of our red flags.
It made me think of it in a very different way. Like, oh, I do have red flags. It's easy to
Yeah.
point out other people, like you
Or
were
we
saying.
love seeing other people's red flags.
Yes,
Ooh,
yes.
red flag,
Oh, red flag. Can't date that person. Can't date that person.
But what are my red flags?
Right. And even some people were like, "What do you mean? What do you mean my red flags?" And you explained, if someone went on a date with you, what would they go home and tell their friends? They're an 8, but this makes them a 4. What would drive
Yeah.
that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because it is important for us to understand if you don't have self-awareness,
Right.
you can't grow.
Yes.
If you are so intimidated by looking at your flaws, looking at your fault, looking at things that just aren't working in your life, then it's going to be really hard to be in a relationship and be able to have honest conversations.
Absolutely.
And, we want to be able to talk about these things, not hide these things.
Right.
So we definitely want to know what our red flags are. And that moves us on to number 5. What are your triggers? Triggers and red flags are very different. Triggers are what I would say are things that just ignite us, that they tie back to things that have happened, experiences that we've had previously in the past. Like an example of it would be, let's say you grew up in a highly critical environment, and in a highly critical environment, or you had a relationship that was highly critical, and you're sitting down at dinner and the person says something and it's not just 100% positive, and all of a sudden it's not about your reaction to that, what's happening in that moment, but it's you kind of have PTSD and go back to every time somebody you have felt criticized. So you're not just responding to that immediate situation, you're responding to all the times in the past where you've been criticized. And that's why people really escalate very, very quickly. Like maybe the situation is like a 4 in responding to it, but it feels like a 10 all of a sudden. And it's like you just see red, and all you can think about is, oh my gosh, this person is criticizing me. Everybody that I've gone out with has criticized me, and I'm not going to put up with this criticism. Or they turn internally and they just sink. You can tell when you're triggered because the situation is disconnected from your response. And it's very eye-opening when you begin to understand what your triggers are, because then if you understand what your triggers are, you can work on them and you can de-trigger them.
Yeah. And then you can have those conversations where you say, you know what, I was triggered earlier. It had nothing to do with you. I understand my response to that situation
Was exaggerated.
outweighed what actually happened.
Mhm.
And then you can stay present in the relationship, and you can
Yes.
show up in the relationship
Yeah.
instead of retreating or running or getting like anxious about what happened.
Yes. And even like a lot of times you'll have to escape. A lot of times when people get triggered, they will just cut off relationships, and you have to learn that you don't have to do that. If I am triggered, it is my responsibility to work on those things, and I need to understand that it's not about that person. That person didn't trigger me. The stuff that I've not dealt with is what had triggered me. They just touched your pain.
Right.
And when they touched your pain, all your pain came to the surface. It's interesting because sometimes in counseling, people will come in and they will say, to us, oh my gosh, I hate coming in because I just feel like crap.
Yeah.
I feel worse than I did when I first came in. And what's interesting is if there's somebody that hasn't been in touch with their emotions, they don't realize that they carry that every single day. The only thing we've done for a moment is connect their pain back up to their awareness of their pain.
Right.
We don't put pain in people.
No.
We just make them aware that their pain is already there.
Right.
And when we do that, people don't always like that because
No.
it can feel triggering. But that's the same thing like we're talking about with triggers, in the way that people around you will touch your pain and make you aware that there's pain there, and you've been trying to ignore that pain. You've been trying to push it down, minimize it, rationalize it, run from it, escape from it, pretend like I don't know what that is. And sometimes when you get triggered, everything just disintegrates and you can't run anymore. And it feels extremely
Uncomfortable.
It does.
And you don't act like your best self.
Yes.
And then you go into like shame about what just happened instead of just saying, oh, wow, I must have gotten triggered.
Yeah. But if you own your triggers, understand what they are, you lead a completely different life.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, on to number 6. But before we get to number 6, if you are just tuning in and you don't know who we are or what we're doing, or we just came up on your feed, I'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Angie Lynch with the Truth Driven Life, and this is.
I'm Christina Crane with Truth Driven Life.
And what we do here is we're a hospital for the hurting and a training ground for spiritual warriors. We have a lot of really neat events and a lot of really neat resources. So we'll link them down below. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go to thetruthDrivenLife.org. I think this will probably be out on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our channel if you like this type of content. So on to number 6.
Yes.
Number 6, I love this one. What are you looking for in a partner? Understanding, we kind of touched on that earlier. We were saying, what do we bring to the table, but also be aware of what you were looking for in a partner. Make a list. We had a singles class a couple years back, it was an in-depth class, and it was a really fun class because we wrote down the 10 qualities of what we're looking for in a relationship. Now, why you want to do that is because as soon as your little warm fuzzies get involved, you're like, oh, did I want a Christian? Like if you're a Christian and you're looking for a Christian person, and then you start dating somebody that's not a Christian, you have to really ask yourself, what the heck are you doing? Because it's really, if I make my list in advance of what I want, and then I deviate. I'm not talking about it doesn't have to be strict, but there's some things that are pretty important to you.
Non-negotiable.
Yes. And so if I lose track of that because this person makes me feel good, they're not a Christian, but they mowed my yard. They did. If you're acts of service and they do acts of service.
We laugh, but it's that simple. If you're love hungry, yeah.
If you are love hungry, that's a good point. If you are love hungry, you will sell, your list will go.
Yeah. What list?
Yeah.
You threw it out.
And so it's important to have that list, not as in a way of just isolating yourself from people, but just as a reminder, what are the things that are important to you, especially when it comes to deal breakers. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But what do you want? We see it all the time here. We like to talk about this one, and we're not putting anybody down. We just understand that your brain, when it gets into a relationship and it's getting attention and it feels good, that's not your normal brain. You have to decide the things that you want before in order to be okay.
Yeah.
Or your brain on love, your brain on endorphins, your brain on woo, it just doesn't work. So we'll have people come in and say, want a deal breaker, they have to be Christian. And I would agree. You have to have somebody that mirrors your lifestyle and values and, morals and what's important to you. And they'll compromise on the very first thing. And, it doesn't make sense to me. I call it missionary dating. You want to run with somebody, partner with somebody that's going to help lift you up. That's somebody that's going to be your equal in that area. And all of a sudden people forget this and they'll date somebody that's not Christian and they'll say, oh, they'll get saved. No, you don't date potential. You date what?
Where they're at right now.
Amen.
You take them as they are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of I asked you, I think last night, I said, what is the biggest struggle I think that people have when they're in romantic relationships? And you said, accepting the other person.
Yes.
You have to accept people for where they're at today,
Yes.
not where you believe they could go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, it's really insulting if
Yes.
you say, I love you, but I'm going to need you to change in this area. I just don't believe that's the right approach at all. Do we have standards? Yes. But my standard's about me. And so if I come to the table and I say, hey, one way's not right or wrong, but if I am called to the United States, like we were talking about a missionary, if I'm called to the United States and I start dating somebody that's called to mission work in China, that's nothing's right or wrong. We're just moving in two different directions.
Right.
And if we let our feelings get involved, because remember, feelings are great, but feelings will lie to you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's not about anything. I can't say they're wrong for wanting to do it, or they can't say I'm wrong for wanting to stay in America. But you really have to get to the point where this is where I feel God's leading me. This is what I feel my life is supposed to look like. Not in a shallow sense, but just in, if you have a mission that you believe in and you're trying to compromise, there's just some things that won't work. If one person wants kids and the other person doesn't want kids, I don't think one's right or wrong. I just think those things don't mix. So when we begin to think about what we're looking for in a partner, we've got to understand that things do matter.
Yes, because people will get married and say, well, maybe they'll change their mind.
Yeah.
No, they told you
No.
who they were before
Yeah.
you got married.
Don't try to change anybody.
Right. That doesn't feel good, like you were saying. It
Mhm.
feels awful to feel like you're not quite good enough.
I know. And once you open that door, oh,
Yeah.
it's just it just leads to doubt and insecurity in the relationship.
Yeah.
Which leads us to number 7. What are your deal breakers? And I love this question right after what we were just talking about. You know,
Mhm.
what is your list? What do you want in a partner? Because you have to understand that you can have like, these are must-haves, and these are pretty important, and then you can have some lower, like, it'd be nice, right? But you need to understand, what are your deal breakers. If you want to have children and somebody doesn't, and that's a deal breaker for you, don't date somebody that doesn't.
Want kids.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were saying, you don't date them hoping they're going to change their mind. You eliminate them. Not
Mhm.
it's you're not eliminating the value of the person. I think sometimes we get confused. Well, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. No, you just don't want to
Them
be
to be
uncomfortable.
upset with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there's so much that goes into it, and you just have to begin to realize and take ownership for, okay, this is the kind of life that I want, and these are my deal breakers. And, you know, your deal breakers are between you and God. They're your deal breakers. If God's like, that doesn't need to be a deal breaker, he'll deal with you on it. But there's just some things I do believe. I'm married, but if I were single, a deal breaker for me definitely would be, they have to have the same beliefs that I do,
Mm-hmm.
because of what I do. And so for me, it doesn't make sense to me why people think that doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
If you feel strongly about your faith, if you don't feel strongly about your faith, then yes, that's fine. But usually our audience who we're talking to are people who are very strongly, embraced and embedded in their faith. And if you're going to pick, there's just going to be problems.
How are you going to go after the Lord
Yeah.
if your partner doesn't have that same motivation and attitude
Mhm.
to seek the Lord in every decision in your life?
Yeah.
If that's how you want to live, your
Mhm.
partner has to live the same way. Because what are you going to do when you get in an argument and you turn to the Lord and he turns to the Lord? Like, you got to be on the same page.
You want to be equally yoked.
Yeah.
Because even in a relationship like that, if you don't have a relationship with somebody that goes to the Lord, you'd be the only one going to the Lord.
Right.
And it takes two people to make a relationship work. So really do know your deal breakers, and secondly, allow your deal breakers to be deal breakers.
Mm-hmm.
You're not making a value judgment on the person when you say, hey, we're just headed in two different directions.
Yeah.
I don't believe necessarily there's right or wrong. They're just, if it's a deal breaker for me, I need to own that. And then therefore it would make the relationship just not work for me.
Yeah. And I want to add to that I think everybody should have honesty and trust on the list.
Yes.
And we kind of, I think, said this earlier, but if someone can't tell you no, how honest are they?
Mhm.
So that's a
Mhm.
really important
Yeah.
part of honesty in a
Mhm.
relationship. And how does someone react when you tell them no?
Yes.
So,
And I would, to further build on that, with honesty, that has to be a foundation in your relationship. And I believe it does absolutely have to be a deal breaker, because you should if you get to that point that this person is going to have that access in your life, and you're going to have that type of high level relationship with the person, you can't question, are they telling me the truth? Are they not telling me the truth? If there's any bit of dishonesty at that level, no,
Right.
run.
Run.
It has to be a deal breaker, because you can't go into relationships. You've got to believe that you're for each other, and you've got to believe that no matter what, even if the other person knew that I would be upset, that they're still going to tell me the truth.
Right.
So deal breakers, you got to figure out what your deal breakers are. Number 8, are you committed to growth? You cannot be in a relationship if you are not committed to growth. You can be, but it will be a broken, toxic relationship, because everybody unfolds in, on your walk, on your path with the Lord, with your relationships. And if you don't want to be the same person today, next year as you are today, you want to keep growing.
Yeah.
And both of you have to do that. And I've seen a lot of couples who one person will grow and the other won't, and it causes a lot of friction. So
Yeah.
you do need to think about that. If you are any bit walking a faith lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to grow. And if you are with the person who has no interest in growing, that is going to cause some major problems.
Yeah, we see it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I asked my parents one time how they've been together a really long time, got
Yeah.
married when they were really young. And I asked them one time, what do you think has helped, like, how do you guys made it? Because
Yeah.
most people that got married when they did are not together anymore. And my mom said, I just think that as we changed and grew over the years, we accepted each other along the way.
Yeah.
And we moved with each other in that
Yep.
way.
That's
So
good.
I totally agree. You
Yeah.
have to both be willing to grow together.
You do. And what's hard is, we're talking about these just general points, but there's so much more too. Like, as you're even talking about that, the acceptance is so important for you. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but the acceptance of, I will love you just as you are, and I won't ask you to change. But then also to build on that, to say, I commit to love who you are becoming.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Who the Lord unfolds you to be. I commit to grow with you and walk down our paths together like that, because you're both
Right.
going to change, and you're both going to evolve. And making, sometimes it's like, well, we agreed to this, but we also agreed to love each other as the Lord unfolded our life.
That's so good. I love that. It's true. You have to understand your partner's going to grow.
Yeah.
And your partner's going to grow in different areas than you will at
Mhm.
times. And you're going to have to be willing to dig into that and stay present and stay available in the relationship and
Mhm.
stay emotionally present
Mhm.
and not run and hide and get insecure because your
Yes.
partner's growing in an area that, God's not calling you to right now.
Yes. The beautiful thing, I believe, about all of this is the Lord is never going to put you on a different page as your spouse.
Right.
The Lord is always going to move y'all in the same direction. So even those times where it feels like, oh gosh, our growth is mix matched, they're not. The Lord will put you on the same path. The Lord isn't going to tell one person one thing and then tell the other person the exact opposite.
Right.
The Lord is always going to lead you in the same direction. So if you have the foundation in your relationship that you're like, okay, we'll just turn this over to the Lord, you always end up on the same page.
Yeah.
Always, 100% of the time. But both people have to turn to the Lord.
Yep.
And sometimes that can be a little dicey.
Yes.
So for number 9, are you committed to being the best version of yourself?
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
Relationships, when we start out in a relationship, a lot of times it's easy, because all the hormones and neurotransmitters and all the feel good things are flooding our body. But when that begins to wear off, then usually what drew us to a person begins to irritate us about that person. And so are you committed to saying, who do I want to be in the relationship, and how do I want to treat this person? Not so much, I think we get in the mindset sometimes, well, if they're nice to me, I'll be nice to them. Or if they respect me, I'll respect them. If they love me, I'll love them. And you can't. You've really got to show up in a relationship committed to being the best version of yourself. If they're experiencing a little bit of grouchiness, like you still have to say, how do I want to respond to that? That's where we talk here about a lot about extreme ownership. It's not about what the other person's doing. It's about how do I want to respond to that? I don't want somebody to be able to shift who I am. If I'm being the best version of me, then that is completely different than how they're behaving or how they're acting. It's all about not whether they deserve the best version of me, whether I'm going to do this or whether I'm going to do that. I have to learn how to independently be the best version of myself.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about when people come in for couples counseling, but it's just one person in the relationship. The first thing, a lot of times, not always, but the first thing that tends to happen is they tell you all the things they don't like about their partner.
I know.
But we can't do anything about your partner because you're the one that's here.
Yes. So we're going to work on you.
Right. And so that's what I think a lot of what we're talking about today is about. You have to turn it back on yourself. You can't say, well, they're acting like this, so I will respond in this way. You have to say, what's the best version of me? How do I want to respond in this situation, even though I don't love what's happening in front of me?
And that is just so critical. We talked about, in the workshop, we talked about weenie relationships.
Love that.
Where we're just immature.
Yeah.
We're being immature. To be in a beast mode relationship, you really have to be mature. And to be mature, you have to own your own stuff.
Oh,
you have to say, this is who I'm going to show up and be in the relationship. And it's just, that's what we teach around here. You can't, things you can control and things you can't. I can't control what somebody else is going to do, but I sure can control how I'm going to respond to something and how I am going to be, and not let somebody or a circumstance or an emotion take me off of my character or who I want to show up as.
Yeah. And I encourage, if you're single right now and you're like, well, how do I practice these things if I'm not dating someone or if I'm not in a relationship? You have relationships all around you. You have friendships, you have close relationships. Like, go ahead and start practicing how to do these things in the relationships that you currently have in your life with someone who's safe to do it with.
Because all of these things that we're talking about today, even though we're talking about romantic relationships, we're talking about ongoing committed relationships in which we invest in. Now, the guy at the corner store, we don't have to build a relationship with them.
Right.
But we all, for the world, we do want to love everybody with the love of the Lord. So, but that's kind of like a whole nother podcast.
That's true.
But when you have these committed relationships, then you have a standard in it. Then I have expectations in the relationship. Just our relationship with the world, we don't have to have those. We don't have to, we can have a standard of this is how I'll be treated, but we don't have to, I don't have to trust somebody at the gas station. I just have to be able to trust myself that I can handle situations. And so how you handle different relationships are very different, but in your close relationships, you've got to have a standard.
Yes.
Yes. And you've got to have a standard for yourself, and you have to demand in relationships, not demand in the way that you're trying to extract it from somebody. We demand it by setting a boundary and just saying, I'm not going to be in an exclusive relationship with somebody who's not here.
Right.
And it's not a value judgment on them. It's just about what my standard is. My standard is honesty in my closest relationships. And if somebody can't be honest, then they don't get that access to have that kind of relationship with me. Yeah. And it's not about anything other than if we have investment type relationships, if we have that kind of access, then it's different. We have rings of access. Even Jesus had. He had the masses, he had the disciples, and he had his inner core.
Yeah.
And there different standards on those relationships. There really were, if you begin to take a look at that. But enough of that. Number 10. Now remember, this is not an exhaustive list of, these are just questions I want you to begin to ask yourself if you are relationship ready or not. And number 10 is, are you able to compromise? In a relationship, in a committed relationship where you're investing and the other person is investing, you don't get it your way all the time. You
Sadly, no.
in a relationship, we say it all the time. Two people have to be okay. Two people have to be satisfied. You can't, if you want it your way, go be single.
That's true.
You have to compromise in a relationship. You have to look for a win-win. It has to be something that works for both people. Now, that's not to say that on some things, you might end up on the short end of the stick. But in a relationship, you can't end up on the short end of the stick all the time. Like, there has to be some balance in your relationship. So you have to learn how to compromise.
Yeah.
You know, I think sometimes a good way to think about compromise is kind of for both parties to decide, okay, how important is this to me? It's really easy for me to compromise on things that aren't that important to me. Then yeah, if it's a 3 important to me, but a 7 important to my husband, then let me bend his way, and then vice versa. But sometimes we get this mindset of we'll just fight to be the one that doesn't have to compromise, and we won't really think about, hey, this isn't that important to me. If you're a fighter, if you're contentious, if you just like to bicker, you know, there's people that are immature in relationships and they'll just fight over anything. Like, if you have a compromise mindset, I'm not talking about compromise on, you know, like things like faithfulness in a relationship. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just the logistics of life and things like that. Like, you want to live this place and they want to live that place. Like, sit down. You have to know that you're going to make what's important to your partner important to you.
Yeah.
And that's a compromise mindset. How can we both get what we need out of this? And if we both can't get what we need out of this, then how do we structure our relationship in such a way that overall, the totality of the relationship, there's really some balance.
Yeah. It's good.
Compromise.
Compromise is important.
So important. And not a lot of people do it well.
No. And I love that you pointed out it's not about compromising your values. It's not about compromising your standard.
No.
It's about, do I care about this person? Do I care about their desires, their wants, their needs? Oh, can I care more about them than mine?
Yes.
And do they care about mine as
Yes.
well?
So when you begin to think about this, when you begin to think about, okay, am I ready for a relationship? I hope that these 10 questions really kind of give you a way to place yourself on a continuum. Maybe you're really, really ready. You're like, yes, I've been working on myself. I want to compromise. I want a partner.
Right.
I want to share my life with somebody. I want that. Or maybe you're like, you know, I don't hate making all the choices in my life. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Sometimes there's seasons in our life where God has us going after something and it's just not conducive to getting into a relationship or maintaining a relationship at that time. If you're married, sorry, you got to learn how to multitask. So, but if you're thinking about getting into a relationship, be able to commit and be the best version of yourself in that. And if you just feel like you're not there yet, I promise you, you'll save yourself some pain and them some pain if you'll just kind of slow your roll with that and step back and say, okay, Lord, what are you looking from my life right now? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
You are single.
Yes.
What's the hardest part about being single?
I think not having someone to share those moments with of your life. You know, I mean, I have wonderful friends in my life that I'm very blessed to share those things with, but there's just something more intimate about a relationship and a partner that you're planning your life together.
Yes.
You're saying,
Yes.
hey, this is what I think we should do. What do you think? And they have dreams and goals for life, and how can we make that happen and share? And I think also just the opportunity to love someone on that level and to pour into them.
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest part is that I feel like I have love that I want to give in that
Mm-hmm.
way. I have a lot
Yeah.
of love that I can give to my friends and my family,
Mm-hmm. But it's
but it's a
different.
different type of love.
Yes.
And just kind of having that reserve, but not having anywhere to put it.
Yes.
So I think those are the hardest parts.
I think that's a beautiful way to say that.
Yeah.
And one thing I love is that you have been committed to waiting for the right person.
Yes.
That you're not going to let loneliness, you're not going to let the immediacy of a circumstance
Right.
pull you into something that's just not going to work for you.
Right.
I
And
have,
I have safeguards in place for
Mhm.
that because we're all susceptible.
Yeah.
But I have people in my life that I'm like, hey, just FYI, let's watch out for this and things like that. Because I don't want to settle.
You don't.
You know, I don't
No.
and I don't mean settle for I just mean settle for
For
someone
you.
that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
We don't fit. I don't
Mhm.
want them to be with somebody that doesn't fit for them either.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's really important to me to maintain that standard and to not fulfill that because even when I'm married, I'm going to experience loneliness.
Yes, you
And
are.
my partner's not going to be able to fulfill that.
No.
So I want to know now how to go to the Lord for that.
Yeah. So what I want you to do is I think we've opened up this subject for you to just to think more on
Mhm.
and to take, if you want a beast mode type relationship, you got to have beast mode type commitment
Yes.
to go into it. And if you're just not ready for it, it's okay.
Mhm.
Nothing wrong. There's
No.
no shame in just not being ready or wanting to work and finesse a little bit more things in your life. Remember, if you're an upgrade, you get an upgrade. And so
Mhm.
let's just
The
think
most
about
important
times.
decision you will ever make in your life is who you marry.
Yeah. It will impact everything in your life.
Yes.
It'll impact your call, your mission, your purpose, everything about it. So it's not
Mhm.
something to take lightly, and it's not something to get into and develop feelings and then realize this is probably not the best for me and not be able to extract yourself from that.
Yes, absolutely. That's why those God Squad relationships are so important to incorporate into that. And just being able to answer these questions. I mean,
Mhm.
even if this is the first time you're hearing it and you think, oh my gosh, I can't answer half of these, that's okay. This is an opportunity
Mhm.
to get curious about yourself and
Mhm.
talk to your God Squad. Hey, can you help me, see this in a different way? Is there anything that I don't see that I'm not able to answer here?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's wrap this up. And I'd like to say a little prayer for you. Let's just pray here. Dear Lord, anybody that hears this video, anybody that hears this message, Lord, I just thank you for pouring out an anointing on all of their relationships. Lord, I thank you that there's people here that are listening that have needs and they're scared and they have doubts and they're saying, I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever have the kind of relationship that I want. Lord, I would just ask that you would put just a refreshing into them. Lord, that you would just give them the encouragement to run the race that they're supposed to in these areas of relationships. Lord, that you would just give them nuggets along the way that keep them running. Lord, I'd ask that you would make their person just shine so bright. Lord, that they would be able to see them. And during the process, that you would be able to comfort them along the way. And Lord, that you would just bless them with the ability to see who they truly are. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.